This is the CBC Radio Network.
It certainly is. Good morning, everybody. We'll turn now from the very serious to the lighter. Or is it still the serious? That's for you to decide. It certainly is fascinating. My guest coming up is David John Oates. The subject, reverse speech. And believe me, you've never heard anything like it. It is absolutely incredible. We had David on several weeks ago, and we'll let him tell you what happened. All right, I have the bio of David John Oates, but I've got something better. I've got a letter from somebody he knows, and he has no idea I'm going to read this, but I'm going to read it. Art, I've had the privilege of being a private client of David John Oates since September 26, 1995. I was referred to David by my former osteopath, who sensed I had some major unconscious blocks to my healing. I was poisoned from ingesting contaminated and a certain contaminated drug in January of 1990, and my life has been a downward spiral of constant pain, illness, abandonment, medical bills, insurance hassles, maltreatment from dozens of various professionals in the medical field since such time. This brief background of my life circumstance is what led me to open my mind to work with David at an unconscious level. After reading the cover story article on David John Oates in a holistic newspaper last September, I went to hear a lecture he gave in San Diego. I went intending to only briefly stay, as my pain level is such it makes sitting for extended periods hard. However, I sat mesmerized in my chair for the entire 3 hours, and at the insistence of the awestruck, eager crowd, David generously gave us an extra hour of his time and expertise. From the first moment I saw David and heard his genius discovery of reverse speech, I knew I was destined to work with him. Art, I've been seen by some of the big-name doctors at prominent research facilities up and down the West Coast. Not one of them had given me any hope for healing from my life of pain and misery. David, on the other hand, has given me genuine hope for a pain-free life by working with me on an intimate, deep, unconscious level. David has demonstrated extraordinarily high integrity in working with me and has never quit on me when many others had, despite the fact that his discovery of reverse speech is of Nobel Prize caliber. David remains a humble, approachable man of great character and depth. I feel honored to work so closely with David. I commend you, Art, for hosting David on your prominent radio show so he can spread his amazing technology throughout the world. Reverse speech reveals the truth, and the ramifications of David's monumental discovery can be used for tremendous good in the world. On a personal note, I'm overjoyed to report that I'm finally beginning to heal myself of things experts deemed incurable. David John Oates, remarkable man and gifted therapist, deserves all the credit for this miracle. That's from Cassandra in San Diego. David John Oates is the founder and developer of reverse speech technologies. He proposes a theory that language, ours, all language, is twofold, forward and reverse. By analyzing speech in reverse, the newly discovered voices of the unconscious may easily be heard by a trained ear, and in many cases, an untrained ear. David is a popular guest on radio and TV, including CNN's The Larry King Show, Extra, and Strange Universe. And he conducts student training in reverse speech, and if you have never heard it, prepare to have your mind blown. This is going to be a real experience for you. Here is David John Oates, and David has a speech impediment. And this, by the way, which we discussed on the last show, is what led him, logically, into a study of speech. And that's how all this really began, is it not, David?
That is correct, Art. Yeah, I've had a speech stutter since since my early teenage years, and actually when I was in high school, I could barely get 2 words out. And I can actually recall when I was in first year high school, I stood up to ask a question of my teacher at the time, and I could barely speak, and he said to me, "David, would you sit down and don't talk to me again until you can speak correctly?"
Oh, my.
And that ruined my entire high school years. I never asked another question again, and I eventually left high school without graduating. And,
that must have been that's awful.
That was disgusting. That really ruined me. And it's been a long battle ever since then to climb up out of that statement. And,
of course,
we forget the power of our words. What we say to people, both forward and backward now, as my discovery shows, has the ability to help us or to hurt us severely, so I'd just like to make that comment before I start.
All right. Well, how in the world, I'm curious, how in the world did you get an interest or even discover the concept of reverse speech?
Well, it's quite a simple story, really. I was running a halfway house for street kids in Australia in the outback, and this was back in '83. And we had an evangelist from the United States traveling through, and he was preaching that rock and roll is the devil's music, and if you play records backwards, you could hear satanic messages.
Backmasking.
Backmasking, that's correct. And I had some of my kids were playing these records backwards, and they came to my office claiming that they could hear demons speaking to them. My initial reaction was anger. I was really upset at this evangelist for preaching such rubbish to the kids, and I went home that night to rewire a tape player to prove that all this was a load of rubbish. I mean, how can you play speech backwards or music backwards and hear stuff?
Sure.
And I'm sure all of us have had that same thought. And however, I've got a fairly good ear for audio. I'm an amateur radio operator and been fiddling around with electronics for most of my life. And I put a tape in the tape player and ran it back, and much to my shock, I heard what I thought was a very clear message. And there was no superimposed soundtrack, and what was happening was it was the backward phrase was occurring purely by the way the forward phrase was put together. In other words, by the way the phonetics and the syllables were sung forward, was sung in such a peculiar fashion that it caused a complete intelligent sentence backwards. And
that is very interesting. In other words, that was real backmasking, or is it? I guess real backmasking in the sense that it was not actually played backwards. There have been a number of groups. I think the Beatles did it, didn't they?
Oh, yeah, they did it quite intensely with their whole Paul is Dead controversy. They hid messages in that hinted Paul had died, and it was really just a marketing gimmick. There's actually two different types of backmasking, and the two get confused.
One is intentional,
and one is not intentional.
There you are.
Yeah, and that's just caused by the way the words are spoken or sung at the time. And religious fundamentalists got a hold of this, and they heard these messages, and they were saying, "Oh, well, gee, how can this get there?" And the only possible explanation is the singers are demon possessed, And,
all right, now therein lies a question. When you're talking about music, David,
right.
would the backmasking be the person who wrote the song or the person who sings it?
Oh, what an interesting question. I don't totally have the answer to that question. I actually moved out of music into speech. It was a whole bunch more simpler. My general answer is to do with the entire creative processes around the actual writing of the song. I think it's with the artist and the tune combined. I did numerous tests on this, and for example, A Stairway to Heaven, I looked at several different versions of Stairway to Heaven by different artists and different tunes, and sometimes I would find exactly the same reversal from artist to artist, and other times I wouldn't. I think in the original creation process, it comes from the artist who writes the song, but as other artists sing it, their own thought influence their singing style, and hence the reverse phrases.
Fascinating. And we need to get into a little bit of When there is reverse speech, as you listen, first of all, I guess everybody ought to know, you don't mess with it. You don't add echo or manipulate what you're doing. You're simply taking regular speech and at the same speed...
Literally running it backwards.
Literally running it backwards.
And in point of fact, if I was to process the sound, I actually tend to lose the reversals.
Is that right?
Any attempt to process or compress the sound actually clips the top of the reversals off because they're actually occurring in the high tones of speech. And processing clips the top of the waves, and you lose them.
Well, what I found absolutely fascinating that we hit on in the last show, when you're listening to reverse speech, you'll go along and you'll hear a lot of mumbo-jumbo that doesn't mean anything. When you get to a reverse speech item that really is reverse speech, there's a kind of a, how did you describe it last time, a sort of a...
well, it's a sing-song tone. There's a distinct tonal shift, is the words I generally use. The gibberish has a monotone tone to it. Then there's a split-second gap just before the reversal occurs, and the tonality shifts very dramatically, and it takes on this sing-song melodious tone for the entire duration of the reversal.
And really
when the reversal finishes, the gibberish slots back to the normal monotone tone. And because when I'm teaching my classes, that's one of the very first things I teach my students to look for is what's that tonal shift. And you can feel it too. You can actually, you can feel it on a fairly deep level. And a lot of my students will know there's reversal there simply by the shifting tonality, but still not yet had their ears trained enough yet to pull out what that reversal means.
In the last program we did, I began to hear that. And, and when you said that, it was like a light bulb going off. I went, yeah, right. It is different. As you listen through reverse
totally
speech,
different.
all of a sudden, boom, it jumps out at you. And okay, the audience should now know that reverse speech reveals not what you're consciously thinking necessarily, but what you're unconsciously thinking. And David, you've said in reverse speech, if a person in forward has told the truth, reverse speech, when you find it, will tend to confirm that truth.
Correct.
But if they have lied, it will reveal the lie.
Correct. My belief is the human psyche was made and born to be honest and truthful and integral. And over the eons and centuries, we have slipped further and further away from honesty and that basic truth with a capital T.
Well, then there ought to be a lot of material for you.
There's a lot of material for me. Yes, there is. And it's interesting. One of the things I teach my analysts, when they're interviewing people, sometimes, there's a tendency on my analysts to push them to tell the truth. And then I say, no, don't. Let them lie as much as they lie.
Let them go, because then you'll be able to... So really, you help out therapists, or are you a therapist?
Yes, I've been in therapy for 10 years. I'm a certified hypnotherapist. I'm also an NLP master practitioner. They're the qualifications I run by. I have a fairly large practice in San Diego. I was shocked you read that letter. You really took me by surprise. I'll have to ring up Cassandra tomorrow and speak to her about that. But
well, I thought it was a nice testimonial for you.
It was very nice. And in point of fact, my client files are full of testimonials very similar to that. Reverse speech is an extremely very powerful tool for accessing the unconscious mind. One of the problems facing traditional therapy is to actually get to the source of the problem. Therapists can take years and years to reach that source if they ever do. And reverse speech goes right to it in the first tape recording. I will see a client, the very first thing I'll do is I will tape them, and in that 1/2 an hour tape, I will get the precise reasons and causes for that person's psychosis or whatever issue they're working on. In addition to that, on the deepest level, reverse speech actually accesses what I call the core structures of the unconscious mind.
So then how do you come at a patient? Do you do it in the traditional way, in forward speech, and just let them say their thing? Or do you have questions that are angled a little differently?
Yeah, I've developed my own questioning technique, there's certain key words that will prompt certain key reversals to occur. There's certain tonal shifts that I move into to elicit reversals, and I've learnt these over the years. The fact is, I mean, if anyone talks, speech reversals will occur. I mean, that's a given because it's the natural function of language. But
sure.
you can learn to specifically enhance or direct what reversals you want. And so in therapy, I have a very specific questioning style, and I actually spend 3 weekends in my training class teaching people how to do it. You know.
Do you think the day will come in America or the world when reverse speech will be court admissible?
Oh, absolutely. And in point of fact, there has already been a precedent set, which
Really?
a set for this, and that was in the Judas Priest trial in Reno, Nevada. One of the rulings of the judge was that these phrases did exist, but there was no evidence put forward to suggest it was caused by anything else other than coincidence, and also there was no evidence put forward to suggest that it was subliminally suggestive. So the precedent has already been set, and I'm just waiting for a trial case.
Well, how would one attempt to validate as a science reverse speech? Would you use a lie detector, for example?
That would be one way to go about it. To verify. Well, there's many different ways that you could do. I would suggest, for a start, some trial tests with lie detectors to look at the reading of the lie detector compared to the analysis of reverse speech.
Sure.
Blind tests are also a very good way to go about it. I will frequently do this. I will put 10 or 15 reversals down on tape and without a script or a transcript, and I'll play it to 3 different groups of people. In one group, I'll say, this is what the reversal says. In another group, I will give them a control phrase. I'll say, the reversal says this when it actually doesn't. In another group, I'll ask them what to hear. And normally, without failure, the group 1 will hear the phrase, group 2 will not hear the phrase, and group 3 will get a word here and there.
I have a special request for you.
Yes.
And that is, it comes from several listeners. We're about, after the bottom of the hour, to get into some incredible examples of reverse speech. But the big first debate is coming this Sunday. And I've had many people fax me already and say, be sure David records the full debate.
I have every intention of doing that. In point of fact, I did have a camping trip scheduled for my family this weekend, and much to my daughter's dismay, I canceled the trip.
Oh, I see.
Just
so
to get ready for the
debate.
And I'll put that up on my website. Is what I'll do. I'll put the entire transcript on there plus the reversals. So,
gee, you know, like the candidates don't have enough to worry about already. Now they've got David John Oates on their back. All right, wonderful, David. We're going to take a break here at the bottom of the hour, and when we come back, if you would crank out that a couple of examples that we had in the last show to get them started, maybe Neil Armstrong.
Sure.
That one's a go. All right.
First.
All right, good. Coming up right after the break, my guest is David John Oates. I'm Art Bell. This is CBC. Back now to David John Oates. And David, tell me before we get started, since the first time you were on my program, what's happened?
Quite a lot. I've pretty much been inundated with phone calls, first of all from the press. I've been on Extra TV. I was on there last night, and we have also filmed a major special on reverse speech that will air on October 30th. I've been contacted by Hard Copy. I'm flying up to Seattle, Washington at the end of the month to do a TV promo, an hour special up there on KOMO.
That's my affiliate in Seattle.
Ah, well, thank you very much.
My goodness, you've been busy.
Extremely busy. My phone line hasn't stopped ringing. It's just been going non-stop. I've been waiting 13 years for this. I've been working very, very, very hard. I put in probably 100 hours every week on this, and it's a great joy for me to finally see my technology getting out there. My book is in the printers now, so it's on its final print, so it'll be out in two weeks. My technology is being launched.
All right. The audience ought to know the following, and that is that all reverse speech is not necessarily easy for the average person to hear. And the analogy I gave last time was I worked as a 911 operator in Monterey County for about a year, which was an incredible job, and one was required for a period of weeks to simply sit, not do the job, just listen so that you could learn how to hear things simultaneously. Right. It was really a hard thing to do for me and for anybody who tries it. And so you hear reverse speech that we don't. After the last program, I asked you to sit down with some people who had the common ear.
Correct.
And the untrained ear, and sort of note those reverse speech items which lit the light bulb for the average person.
Correct.
Which is what we would use here on the air.
Right.
Now, we began the last show with Neil Armstrong, I believe.
I think that was the first one I played. I really can't recall, but it tends to be the first one I played because it was one of the very first reversals in speech I heard myself. So it's one of my favorites.
All right. Well, I can understand why. And by the way, coming more on Bill Clinton tonight, and
Correct.
I understand you have a couple of reversals on me.
I do indeed, Art. You are an interesting chap. The people out there will get to hear what you're really thinking.
All right, let's do Neil Armstrong, and everybody's going to be hearing this first in the forward direction.
Correct.
And then in reverse, and then so they can hear it properly, I think 3 different speeds of reverse. First the normal, and then what?
Right.
And then what do you do?
Well, I'll run it forwards first, and I'll break it to 3 speeds, and then probably what I'll do, I'll play it forwards and backwards successively, so you can just hear how it's constructed.
All right, let's give it a try with Neil Armstrong, that famous sentence.
Okay, here we go forwards first.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Okay, now I'll run it backwards at 3 speeds, and backwards he says, man will spacewalk. And here we go.
Man will spacewalk. Man will spacewalk. Man will spacewalk.
And what I'll do now is I'll run it forwards, backwards, backwards, and the speech reversal, man will spacewalk, has been formed entirely by the way he said his forward speech sounds.
All right.
So here it is, forwards and reverse twice.
Okay.
It's one small step for man, man will spacewalk. It's one small step for man, man will spacewalk.
Okay, and
that is so clear.
Yeah, extremely clear, and that is the thought that he had as he stepped onto the moon. Man will continue to walk into space. We will spacewalk.
Oh, that's incredible!
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible.
And it's a very significant example too, because Neil Armstrong actually had prepared lines. He was supposed to say that's one small step for a man. And he left out the A and said that's one small step for man instead. Now, had he said his lines correct, the speech reversal would not have occurred. And part of my theory is that just before we are speaking, the brain structures the sounds of speech in such a way that these 2 messages can be communicated simultaneously.
Tell me something, David. Can you sometimes tell listening? Are you trained well enough that you can tell listening in forward speech when a reversal has occurred? Are you getting good at that?
Yes, pretty much. There's certain key factors where reversals will occur. Pauses and stutters, a sudden change in topics, an unusual tonal shift. Someone will go up in tone or down in tone. It's fairly, once you get to know this phenomenon, it's fairly easy to tell where they can occur. And,
all right. Let me get this question out of the way, because otherwise a lot of fax paper will get wasted with people trying to ask it. Please ask David if he's worked with any other languages other than English, if your theory, or David's, holds true about truth versus lies. By listening to reverse speech, it should not be bound by language.
Correct. That is quite correct. It does occur across the board, no matter what language is being spoken in. I'm currently training a student from Germany, and she's flown out from Germany just to take my course. What it appears to be is the language in which we are thinking in at the time of speaking is where the reversals occur. So if she's speaking in English but thinking in German and translating in her mind...
You get a German reversal?
You get a German reversal.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Oh,
it gets even more complex, too, because sometimes with split languages, you'll get it half in English and half in German. So she's over in Germany lecturing right now with and just getting overwhelming interest. And she actually tells me that the German reversals on German-speaking people are actually clearer than the forward speech, which is quite fascinating. And I'm waiting for her to come back so I can look at the tapes that she's gathered.
It is interesting. Well, for tonight's visit, we're going to concentrate on English, because this is hard enough concept for a lot of people to grasp, even in English. So
correct.
We'll keep it in English. Now, the next thing that I sort of return visit I want to pay is, you determined that children, babies speak in reverse before they speak in forward.
That is correct. It was one of my very first questions when I wrote my theory back in 1987, was, if this is a natural function of language, when does it begin? Are we born with it, or does it develop naturally? And since then, I've done quite a lot of tests on children, and it would appear as though reverse language begins between 3 and 4 months of age. It progresses in the normal forward fashion, like, forward language will commence 12, 13, 14 months, depending on the child. But
sure.
In reverse, it starts with single words first: mummy, daddy, hungry, help. And then between 6 and 7 months of age, they begin to put 2 or 3 words together in a sentence. And by the time forward speech begins with the simple words, the reverse language has become quite complex.
Well, tell the story now of your 2 little ones.
Which particular story shall I start with?
Well, your own children.
Right. My children were born in July of 1987, and from the moment they came home from hospital, I began to tape them. I got quite obsessed with it, quite frankly, and I was taping them constantly. And
so you were holding a little recorder up in front of their little baby mouths.
I was totally and utterly completely doing that, yes, and
what did your wife,
my friends' kids as well. So.
What did your wife have to say about that?
Well, I can be a bit obsessive at times, and it got annoying. But I'm sort of like that. Once I get an idea in my head, I can't let it go. I know. And, I'm divorced now, so what can I say?
I see.
But I have custody of my kids, and they live with me now.
Believe me, I understand obsessive behavior.
Yes, I'm sure. So I found from as early as 4 months of the very first word I heard on my kids was we were at a friend's house playing a game of Trivial Pursuit, and the kids had been crying for 10 minutes or so, and they hadn't been attended to, and then there was one particular cry that just prompted our attention, and when I later reversed that, it said "mummy." And that was the very first reverse word I heard on my children. And I'm sure a lot of parents listening to your program tonight can remember there's those specific cries from the children that seem to pierce the
Sure.
pierce the heart. There's one cry cry that will get your attention, one cry that won't.
That's right.
And I've used this extensively in my practice too, particularly with the suspected molestation cases. One of the problems with working with children is what are they really thinking? What is really going on inside there? What damage has been done? And reverse speech, the applications that reverse speech has in child psychology is just endless.
All right, well, why don't you give us some examples of children?
Okay, well, we'll start off with the favorite one that you liked last time. And
Stood my hair on end.
Yeah, right. This is when they're 7 months of age, and I'm running around the room with a tape player and going, talk backwards for daddy, talk backwards for daddy. And my daughter suddenly sees this tape player in my hand, and she reaches out for it with interest. She wants to know what this is. And so I'll play forwards first, that particular cry. So here we go. Okay, quite a simple baby sound.
Typical gibberish, right?
Correct. And backwards it says, what's that? And that's quite clear.
Quite clear. What's that? And that is exactly how a child would say it. Exactly.
Oh, sure. It has the typical baby sounds to it. Now, let me move on and play another one on kids. This is at 13 months of age, and let me set the scene up a little bit. My daughter was in the bath, and she was trying to pick up a cup, and she was pushing the cup along, and she couldn't pick it up, and then she looks up to me, reaches out her hands, and says, forwards, Daddy. Okay?
Right.
So I'm going to we'll run this forwards first, and listen for the sound Daddy right at the very end, okay?
All right.
What? Okay, and that was forward.
What I thought I heard was dad, dad, dad.
Right, that was right. That was at the beginning, dad, dad, dad. And at the you're quite correct. It was an imperfectly formed dad, dad.
Right, exactly. All right.
Now backwards, we don't have any of that dad, 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 dad. Backwards, she says, David, help me. A very clear sound. And the interesting thing was that the David occurs on the imperfectly formed word dad, daddy. So what she's actually doing is she's connecting the concepts together. Daddy, David, David, daddy. The two are the same.
Of course.
So here we go. David, help me.
Oh, my God.
And that should have been fairly clear.
Oh, it was. Oh, God. Give it to me again, if you would, at regular speed backwards.
Sure. Here we go.
Oh, man, that's eerie.
Spooky stuff.
That is. It's actually ethereal sounding. It's almost ghost-like, David.
Right. It does have that sense to it. It really does, especially when you look at just regular conversations. I've been playing a lot of political stuff on the air, and that's been processed sound, so you lose the real magic of the way reversals sound in regular conversation. And yeah, they've got this ghost-like quality to it, which is why it's been given this satanic, occultic label to it. And it's just a different sound, and it almost sounds like an echo sometimes.
That's
and
right.
That is because it's not just one voice speaking. It is the totality of the human mind speaking. And,
that's weird.
And the human mind is composed of thousands of different parts. I mean, consciousness is not one single entity, but it's a combination of the whole. And you get this echoey, dual voice sound.
That is not added echo. That is the way it comes out. And if you doubt that and you've got a computer, just use your own computer and take an example, record my program here or get a recording of it, and take the forward speech and reverse it on your own computer, and they'll end up with the same result, right?
Absolutely correct. Oh, yeah. It's quite easy to tell I'm not doctoring these tapes. Just reverse my forward, just the reversal, and you'll hear the forward soundtrack. That's a very easy test.
That is really odd sounding. All right. Any other young'uns?
Well, actually, yeah. Let's look at another kid's one. This is a little bit older. This is in an Aussie accent. This is at so maybe a little bit difficult to hear forwards. This is at 3 years of age, and they're two kids playing, and one notices that the other one has an inoculation mark on her arm,
right.
And she says, "Do you have an injection?" Okay, which is Aussie for, well, I think you use that term here. So here we go forward.
Do you have an injection? What does it make you better?
And she says, "Do you have an injection? What do you mean to make you better?" And backwards it says, "I hated them."
I hated them. I hated them. I hated them.
Absolutely. That's exactly what you would expect a child to say. And
of
did you
course.
notice that echoey type sound to it?
I absolutely did, an ethereal sort of sound. It was
correct.
Really these particular ones, the children really do stand my hair on end, because this is before, well, not in this case, but the earlier case was before forward speech.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely. Well, let me play you one more on kids. I don't know whether I played this one on your last show last week or not, but we'll play it again anyway.
All right.
If I did. And this is where I moved one of my children from one room to another, and I was setting up the table to record, and I just moved my daughter from the lounge room to the kitchen. Okay, so that's the scene, and so we'll run it forwards first. Here we go. Okay, now I'll run it backwards, and the reversal says, "I now come here," from one room to the next. And notice the typical sing-song tone. This is very typical of reverse speech. "I now come here."
Oh. Oh, my God.
And that's quite clear, too.
Oh, that's too clear.
Yeah.
And again, the very same sound. Now, the audience ought to know, when you're listening to reverse speech, generally you just get a bunch of gibberish that doesn't have that ethereal sound to it. And when you stumble into a reversal, there's that ethereal sound.
Correct. Well, listen, let me move on to another one in speech then, okay? You sure better hear this one. I'm just, I wasn't planning on playing this one, but let's pull it up anyway. And, I just saw another one on kids I should play you too, but I'm just loading this file up now. This is a client. This is from a client session, and I need to say that any client sessions I play, I have full permission to play these examples, okay? And this is a client of mine who has just finished the entire session process, okay? And I'm asking for his reaction.
David, wait.
Yes.
Wait. We are at the top of the hour, so let us hold this one for the audience that joins us after the top of the hour, okay? All right, stay right where you are. Do you see what I mean? Does this stand your hair up or what? Do you understand the implications for the world of what you're hearing right now? If not, stick around, you will. David John Oates is my guest. Reverse speech is the topic. I'm Art Bell.
This is the CBC Radio Network.
Whatever you're doing right now, I suggest you put it aside, turn the volume on the radio up, and concentrate. Because I assure you, this will blow your mind. My guest is David John Oates. He, for many years, has been developing a technology, actually, it's a technology called reverse speech. Now, when you speak forward, you say whatever you say. But on occasion, there is what's called reverse speech. And briefly put, if you are telling the truth, a reverse speech clip will affirm that truth. You'll hear it. If you're lying, that will be told in reverse speech. It is eerie. It is strange. It even begins before you can talk in a forward direction. You're going to hear more examples of it coming up shortly. I know some affiliates have just joined the network at this hour. So we'll give you a sort of a little catch-up and then move forward. Now, you played a series of children, your own children and I guess others.
Yeah, they were others as well.
All right, they had prompted this question before we move on. Would you ask David to comment on this? His study of children's backward speech prompted this thought. For a long time, I believe that up until the age of 2 years old, children are still connected with a spiritual or etheric world. And about the time the terrible twos hit, they seem to lose that connection with the spiritual plane. Have you found any evidence that would support that theory?
Not specifically, no. Reversals are very, very simple and basic, like they are in forward speech. You know, mummy, daddy, hungry, help. Metaphors begin at round about 12 months of age, and by metaphors I mean a very large proportion of the language in reverse speech is metaphoric in nature, speaking in pictures and images. And
as you get older, does the ethereal sound that we heard begin to change?
You lose the impact of it, yes. So if one could consider right brain communication as being spirit communication, then it depends on what you mean by that. It's that word, the meaning varies from person to person. So yes, the etheric sound that you're hearing in the young children does drop off as they get older. Reverse speech is very much a spiritual language too. It speaks extensively about the stay to the soul, about our connection with God, our mission in
yes.
life, and they get stronger as you get older. The children don't talk much about that, and as once they get to the 2s and the 3s, the word soul and God begins to creep into the reversals. So,
really?
So in what I've found would actually maybe show the opposite of that.
All right.
It's difficult to tell. I've never been asked that question.
Well, it's a good one. All right. Now, here's another good one. Art, I'm never going to forget giving my nephew a cup of water to drink, and I heard him say, it's good. Only problem was he couldn't talk at the time. He was only mouthing sounds. Can somebody occasionally hear reverse sound? It was eerie to have heard the words from a child that wasn't saying more than dada or mama.
Right. Most definitely, yes. It's been well documented for quite some time that the brain is capable of reversing functions. I mean, in one sense, what I'm saying is not out of keeping with accepted theories about how the human mind works.
Sure.
Dyslexia, for example, is a condition where, in extreme cases, they will actually reverse the sounds of words.
All right, I think I asked you about this earlier, David. You have a speech impediment.
Correct.
How does that affect... and I'm sure you've studied others with speech
right.
impediments as well as yourself. How does that affect reversals? Are there more of them, fewer of them, harder to detect?
No, when my speech stutter clicks in, my whole system shuts down, and I actually don't have reversals on my speech stutter. It's like my whole left and right brain goes into a lock trying to get it out, which is an unusual observation. I would have expected to see the opposite, but when my natural speech stutter clicks in, occasionally I'll hear a speech reversal, but not very often.
All right, let's move on. I know you've got some more. You've got another child's example.
Correct. This one is a really this is a very interesting example. One of the things we see in reverse speech is that we'll often get a mirror image. The reversal will use exactly the same words as the forwards, but the words will not be a reversal of each other. So you get the same words backwards and the same words forwards, but they're not occurring on the same words, if that makes sense. and so you get this mirror projection. So here is my daughter actually at 6 years of age, and she's just run away from home. Or she just finished running away from home, and I followed her the whole time, and I was watching her, okay? So we're talking about this forward, okay?
Yes.
So here we go.
I was following you and watching you. I was hiding behind the car, watching what you were doing.
Were you? I never knew that.
No, because I was being very sneaky.
Okay, and you can